Hello everyone, my name is Austin Schmidt and I'm one of the 5th years in Professor Anna Maria Visla's Advisee section, and this is my thesis project titled The Bismarck Mandan Rail Bridge Park, using private-public infill to create a destination waterfront park in the city of Bismarck, North Dakota. The study is really a continuation of my research in one of our past program courses, where I began an interest in a Rails to Trails project, which is the conversion of abandoned rail lines into pedestrian and bicycle trails. At the same time of this initial research, the nonprofit group Friends of the Rail Bridge were just beginning their fight to preserve the rail bridge with an interest in transforming the bridge into a Rails to Trails project after BNSF announced plans to tear it down. Originally assisting in the railroad's expansion westward, the rail bridge connects the capital city to its sister city of Mandan and has become a defining landmark to both cities. Still used as an active rail line today, the Bismarck Rail Bridge is similar to that of the Brooklyn Bridge in the sense of each respective city has turned its back on its waterfront with this iconic structure in the background. However, the Bismarck Rail Bridge predates the Brooklyn Bridge. After spending some time working on the feasibility study with Professor Dominic Fisher, my research and interest slightly shifted from a Rails to Trails project, but rather towards an urban waterfront. Using my initial Rails to Trails data, I was able to move forward and apply some of the research into my new findings in regards to urban waterfronts. I was able to determine that many Rails to Trails projects are funded through partnerships allowing for more than one entity to split responsibilities and costs while beginning their transformation. As I was looking into successful urban waterfronts, it became apparent that these partnerships are not so rare and many waterfronts utilize them as well. Starting this past fall semester, I began collecting data and information on 4 urban waterfront parks. It was determined that Brooklyn Bridge Park would be a guiding example as I continue my research and design proposal. The last 3 parks that I followed and collected data from were Domino Park, also in Brooklyn, the East River Esplanade in New York City, and Tom Hannafin River's Edge Park, which is also on the Missouri River, but located in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Of the 4 chosen parks, I was able to identify 6 programming elements that assisted in each park's success and create a perfect recipe for the ideal waterfront park. After calculating the total area for each park and its programming elements, I placed this data into a matrix table where I began to analyze their similarities and differences. When it came time to identifying my thesis site and what should be included within it, I was able to reverse the matrix table findings and use the same methods to determine how much space should be allocated to each of these 6 program elements within my own site. As the Missouri River spans through much of the Midwest, it has helped to orient many settlements from the Mandan and Hidatsa tribes to the current U.S. cities that fall along its shorelines today. Bismarck being one of those cities, the river has become a local destination for the area. However, because of its lack of public programming and accessibility, the river has become distant. From this diagram, we are able to see how the Missouri River shapes the city's western edges while remaining in close proximity to many of Bismarck's community staples. Looking at the river as a whole in comparison to the city, the river's disconnection can almost be traced down to the fact that some of its only public access points are 2 miles apart and formed by arterial roadways. Ironically, one of those roadways being the community's favorite called River Road Drive, because of its vantage points of the water and surrounding hillsides, actually bisects the city from its shorelines of the river, creating a pedestrian disconnect. Despite its few access points, the river holds a strong sense of place to many in the community. Primarily for its recreational usage in the warmer months, it is not uncommon to see the sandbars lined with pontoons forming parties in the middle of the river, fishing near the shoreline, or tours happening from inside the Lewis and Clark riverboat. With the river being a popular hangout, it is not uncommon for the water to resemble that of a highway in the sense that traffic goes up and down as boats stick to each respective side of its shorelines. Aside from the river and being the state capital of North Dakota, the city is home to many year-round festivals and outdoor activities, making it a small urban city on the rise. Already strong in open space for sports and recreation, an opportunity is provided to design and reconnect the public's relationship to the water's edge. This study focused on the preservation of the Bismarck Mandan Rail Bridge and the surrounding 52 acres, looking to use the bridge's transformation as a catalyst for a waterfront park in the capital city. Using the typology of urban waterfront parks, I chose to do my thesis in the city of Bismarck because of its lack of connection to the river, the opportunity to design for year-round programming, and to build up the idea to create a regional destination within the upper Midwest. With the conversation already in place to transform the bridge into a Rails to Trails project, my design focus was already drawn to the remaining open space, which had become derelict with overgrown vegetation, all while being split into two pieces because of the BNSF-owned railroad right-of-way. Specifically chosen for its close relationship to the bridge, as well as its parallel alignment to both cities of Bismarck and Mandan, I was able to determine that most suitable site for riverfront development is directly south of the rail bridge, with consideration to the already established trail systems and road corridors. Before beginning the design process, it was noted that the site's large elevation changes, variable water levels, and its location within the city would provide some of the greatest challenges as well as create major design opportunities. Surrounding the site, much of the landscape is lined with both native and invasive plant species such as Russian olive, green ash, eastern cottonwoods, and a mixture of native grasses and forbs. The steep cut banks of the river change each season, partially due to the spring flooding coming from the mountains in Montana at the river's mouth. With the river's strong current, an abundance of soft sand usually gets pushed along the shoreline, forming informal beaches that become overused and disappear by the end of the season. Breaking down the existing conditions even further, site circulation and elevation changes became the major constraints to the site. Most of the existing circulation runs along the outside edges of the site, creating a lack of accessibility, as well as most of the site being deemed difficult but not impossible to develop. Using the CNC machine, I was able to create a topographic model that I used to explore and highlight the site's slope and its great differences throughout the site. You can see that from the river's edge to the top of the hillside and where the railroad runs through the hillside, a difference of about 60 plus feet can be highlighted, which in return has created major erosion control issues. After completing the pre-design portions, including inventory analysis early throughout the semester, I was able to return to my question and further investigate it as I began the schematic phase next. Can private-public infill create a destination waterfront park in the city of Bismarck, North Dakota? Although I believe that the chosen site and the park can become a cultural destination through much of the Midwest, I think that residents of the Bismarck Mandan and the surrounding areas will make up the primary users of the site. Regarding the initial clients for this project, Ford would be the primary stakeholders with their grassroots movement to save the bridge. However, both municipalities of Bismarck and Mandan would make up secondary stakeholders. In the next slide, I will further explain how shareholder relationships would work out. Using the analytical matrix performed during the precedent portions of this study, performance criteria and project goals were justified by accessibility, preservation of the bridge and the waterfront's character, and economic and ecological vitality of the site. As I looked to begin the schematic process, I chose to establish pedestrian and bicycle circulation as the primary modes of accessibility and transportation throughout the site. This would remove the focus on the already underutilized surface parking lots and provide an opportunity to experience the site at the human scale. In the effort to complement the bridge and its surroundings, a regional plant palette and materials palette were chosen to assist in the performance of its year-round programming. Lastly, the final goal was to establish a private-public partnership among the Bismarck and Mandan Parks and Recreation with private developers. This would entail Parks and Recreation covering the initial land purchase before handing it over to the developers, in which a perpetual agreement would be created in the interest that a portion of the sales on site would go towards funding the park and bridge's maintenance in the future. This would benefit the community in the sense that no public dollars would be used in the sustainment of the park. Maintenance and organization of the park would then be handed down to FORB, while the two cities' Parks and Recreation departments would oversee seasonal and event planning. Returning back to the earlier analytical case study matrix, it was determined that in order to achieve success in my waterfront park, I would need to allocate for the following: 3 acres of lawn space, 16.5 acres of hardscape walkways and plazas, 9.5 acres for plantings, 1 acre for sports fields or active courts, half an acre to a playground, and 5 acres towards structural development. The next step being design, a concept was created with the hope to create a landscape that revealed distinct moments within the waterfront similar to the way the scenes along the river did for that of the Mandan tribe and Lewis and Clark. In an effort to utilize the site's steep topography to my advantage, the idea or feeling of discovery and exploration is created upon the north and south entrances to the site, forcing those that visit off to travel off the main walkways in order to experience all that the site has to offer. Working through some initial design process drawings, I began with laying out the site's circulation, as that was going to be the most challenging with the existing conditions. From there, I was able to fill in the spaces with the programming that was determined from the earlier case studies, which resulted in about 13 programming spaces. This allowed for some big design moves, with the first being rerouting River Road away from the water's edge, but rather through a tunnel in the steepest portion of the hillside. This created uninterrupted pedestrian mobility from the water's edges all the way to the site's eastern walls. Rerouting River Road also created the opportunity to develop 2 new entrances within the waterfront. One is a series of terrace stairways up to the newly converted rail bridge, and the other being a new road formed by joining a previously private road into an existing public one. Starting at the north half of the site, we can take a closer look at how guests would travel to and from the rail bridge into a site. A grouping of planted terraces along the proposal of a 4-story multifamily development assists in gaining control of the site's erosion issues. Through the rebranding of the existing riverfront trail into the Missouri River Esplanade, the interwinding routes formed with paver patterns create the site's major corridors. From the Esplanade, guests are able to achieve access to the programming that matches that of the research case studies. With the multifamily development being one of the private developments in the perpetual agreement, the remainder of the proposed development lines the southern edge of the site. Choosing to keep the existing wastewater treatment plant, small infill projects can make more efficient use of what's already existing. Already adapted to the local climate, clusters of native and regional plants were chosen to achieve both performance and environmental goals. With many of these plants already existing naturally along the river, the idea for the site was to bring those same plant species into the site, but provide order and structure so that they can become focal assets within each garden. Channeling the existing large thickets of rhodosia dogwoods and pollinator plantings assist in creating vegetative screens that allow for a sense of security and mystery on each side. River birch, coneflowers, bluestem grasses, and yarrow line the Esplanade's recessed stormwater gardens, while combinations of alliums, tulips, daffodils, and bur oak create seasonal interest and consistency. When it came down to choosing materials for the site, I wanted to select products that would enhance the waterfront while preserving the past. Corten steel planters along the piers complement the bridge's aging trusses with their rust tones, while clay pavers run along the major pathways of the site. Colors of flint, sandstone, and buff bring the warmness of the sand along the shoreline up to the promenade as they form undulating pathways running north and south. These same colors are represented on the fabric-formed concrete retaining walls that channel the white and coal-colored cut banks of the river. By looking back at the case study matrix, I was able to use those same figures to create a cost opinion that is specific to those 6 design elements. I was able to utilize the feasibility study that was performed by the NDSU Landscape Architecture Department on the rail bridge to create a total cost estimate for the park, which can be used by the major stakeholders to further define the scope of work. The principle of the study was to reimagine the Missouri River shoreline in Bismarck as a destination waterfront within the Midwest, which in my opinion was still achieved. On the slide, you can see the design results for each programming element and see that those requirements were not met. In my best attempt to incorporate all of the quantities from the determined matrix table, it was determined that it was not possible to allocate the necessary acreage. It is important to note that success can be reliant on various degrees of measure, as well as the creation of that of an opinionated degree on what constitutes success in regard to the Bismarck Mandan Rail Bridge Park. Despite the design not meeting its spatial requirements, the site could be considered a success in terms of new access points were created, the riverfront's character was preserved along with the bridges, and I was able to turn what was once a steep hillside into a now ADA accessible year-round friendly atmosphere that promoted economic and environmental vitality. Beginning at the site's southern edge, we can take a closer look at the design starting with the reroute of River Road. Neon lights illuminate the short trip through the hillside, creating visual interest that draws attention both in and out of the tunnel. At 54 feet wide, the tunnel allocates a north and southbound traffic lane with 12-foot emergency lanes going each respective direction before popping out on the north half. With much of the eastern edge of the site requiring retaining walls, the custom precast panels were mocked up to represent the steep hillsides with this look as if they were being jaded or pushed in and out of the wall in different sections. Also meant to blend in with the existing grass prairie extending up the hillside, the walls were treated with tones congruent to the permeable pavers. From the River Road Tunnel, we can make our way through the ornamental gardens towards the site's southern pier. Providing an improved home to the Lewis and Clark riverboat, the pier allows better access to the river as the Lewis and Clark riverboat landing has one focus only, and that is to provide the physical space and continuation of the esplanade to extend above the water. Creating a southernmost anchor to the site, the pier is home to lounging nets, an observation edge, and room for dining high above the water. In a better effort to assist the public in gaining access to the water, the Lewis and Clark riverboat landing has a premier feature of the nets which allow the guests to achieve a closer feeling high above the current river flow. From the first pier, we can begin to span north through the primary access corridor. We get to see a closer look at the esplanade materials and the supplementary gardens. Prairie grasses like big and little bluestem and prairie dropseed, with the natural riparian edges of the waterfront assist in soil erosion, improve and protect water quality as it runs towards the river, and provides natural plant diversity. Here we can see a better representation of the warm tones on the esplanade. The esplanade provides the opportunity for year-round access at a smooth and level surface. Inspired by the large masses of the eastern cottonwood along the river's shoreline, illuminated lights create a staggering focal cue as guests meander throughout the site. Continuing north, we can look and see the site's strong linear patterns along the esplanade in comparison to the river running parallel against the riparian edge. This section also provides a better look at the recessed stormwater planters and its inverse relationship with the permeable pavers along the esplanade. Next, we can begin to look at the Capitol lawn. A play on the North Dakota State Capitol grounds, the lawn is to play host to most of the site's activity, as its open center provides flexibility for any type of event. The large thickets of vegetations on the exterior were meant to copy the wind-dispersed patterns on the hillside while screening the lawn. This allows for a sense of security in addition to the framing of new view sheds. Much like the riverboat landing pier to the south, the recreation pier forms a strong anchor piece to the northern half of the site. Adjacent to the recreational pier, we can take a look at the terraced lawns next. Previously unusable due to its steep hillside, the terraced lawns now provide use and purpose for passive sports play, as well as the base to the corridor to the rail bridge trail. Taking a closer look at the esplanade from the terraced lawns, this is the first thing that people see as they come down from the rail bridge trail, highlighting which direction they should head in. By looking back with a bird's eye view of the site, we can see a better angle of the illuminated poles, with each color representing and visually highlighting the site's topography changes as it gets further away from the river as well as farther up the hillside. The last major project element that we're going to take a look at is the rail bridge. Through the conversion of the rail bridge into a pedestrian trail, the illuminated trusses can be seen from neighboring roadways on both sides of the river, as well as give a unique vantage point back to the park. By transforming the rail bridge into a public pathway, it can become a catalyst that sparks the change needed by the Bismarck riverfront and highlight the opportunities at hand.